The bakery's warm, yeasty scent couldn't hide the sting of humiliation. In the middle of a bustling Saturday morning rush, 3 local troublemakers barged in loud and laughing their voices, cutting through the clatter of coffee cups and the hum of conversation. Without warning, they cornered her at the counter. Flour sacks were ripped open, exploding in clouds around her face. One yanked at her shirt until fabric tore across her shoulder. Laughter roared. A phone camera flashed. Every customer stood frozen, stunned, some pretending not to see. Her name was Claire Mitchell, 34 years old, and she'd owned this bakery for 6 years. It wasn't just a business. It was her pride, her safe place, the one thing she'd built with her own hands after leaving a string of dead-end jobs. The bakery was supposed to be her quiet escape from the uglier parts of life. But today, those uglier parts had walked right through her door. The ringleader, a broad-shouldered man with greasy hair named Travis, leaned across the counter with a smirk. "Guess the sweet buns aren't just in the oven, huh?" His buddies roared with laughter. She kept her face still, heart hammering her mind, cataloging every detail, his weight leaning forward. His hands on the counter, the way the other 2 flanked her exit. She didn't answer. This wasn't the first time they'd harassed her. It had started weeks ago. Snide comments when they passed by, lingering in the doorway to make customers uncomfortable, buying nothing. She'd hoped they'd get bored. But now, the game had escalated. Tearing her shirt in front of a room full of strangers wasn't about fun. It was about dominance. And that made it different. Claire's hands itched to grab the heavy rolling pin from beneath the counter, the same one she used every morning at 4 a.m. to flatten dough into perfect sheets. But she didn't move. Not yet. Her mind wasn't on revenge in the reckless heat of the moment sense. She wanted something more deliberate, something that would make sure this never happened again to her or to anyone else in town. The laughter finally faded as they sauntered out, leaving a mess of white powder across the tile and a silence heavier than any oven heat. Customers shifted awkwardly. A woman at a table muttered something about kids these days without meeting Claire's eyes. No one offered to help. That was fine. Claire didn't need help. She knelt sweeping flour into a dustpan, the torn fabric at her shoulder brushing against her cheek with every move. Each scrape of the broom against the floor sharpened her thoughts. She had spent her adult life trying to be the nice one, the kind who forgave quickly, who avoided conflict. But the bakery was her territory, and they had crossed a line. She thought of the storage room in the back and what sat on the top shelf. Not the flour, not the sugar, but the weighty, well-oiled dough roller she kept for big batches. A simple baking tool, yes, but in the right hands, it could be something else entirely. By the time the floor was clean, she had already decided. The next time they walked through her door, they wouldn't leave with smirks. They'd leave with something to remember her by. Claire locked the bakery door early that afternoon, the closed sign swaying in the faint summer breeze that slipped through the open window. The mess was gone. The counters wiped clean, but the moment kept replaying in her mind like a scene she couldn't switch off. The rip of fabric, the burst of flour, the echo of their laughter. She pulled the torn shirt from the trash, holding it up to the light. The jagged tear seemed almost symbolic, a piece of her dignity ripped away in public. She set it aside, her jaw tightening. This wasn't the first time she'd been humiliated in front of others, but it would be the last time she allowed it. As she walked to the back, her gaze drifted to a dusty cardboard box tucked on the highest shelf of the storage room. She fetched the stepladder, climbed carefully, and pulled it down. Inside was a mix of old mementos, a pair of scuffed roller skates, a helmet with faded stickers, and a set of elbow pads. Memories rushed back late nights at the roller derby rink. The sound of wheels against polished concrete and the heavy thud of bodies colliding. Most people in town only knew Claire as the soft-spoken baker. What they didn't know was that for nearly a decade, in her 20s, she'd been Iron Crust, one of the most aggressive blockers in the state's roller derby league. And before that, she'd studied jiu-jitsu at a dingy strip mall gym 3 nights a week. Those skills had dulled with time, but they weren't gone. She sat on the floor, lacing up one skate just to feel the leather mold around her foot again. The muscle memory came rushing back, how to drop her weight plant, her stance, keep her center of gravity low. She imagined Travis and his friends trying to push past her on the rink. They wouldn't have lasted a single jam. Claire didn't want to wait for them to strike again on their terms. If they thought the bakery was easy prey, she'd turn it into a trap they'd regret stepping into. That meant luring them back, and she knew exactly how. Pulling out her phone, she began typing a post for the bakery's social media. This Friday, free tasting event, new summer pastries, coffee specials, and a chance to win a custom cake. Starts at 5 p.m. She knew word traveled fast in this town, especially to the kind of people who'd see free as an invitation. After scheduling the post, she stood and walked over to the workbench. Her fingers curled around the handle of the heavy dough roller she'd been using for years, solid wood smooth from countless hours of kneading. She imagined its weight connecting with a countertop or something else. Claire wasn't fantasizing about reckless violence. She was planning calculated control. Every move had to be quick, precise, and decisive enough to shock them into never returning without landing her in jail. It wasn't about hurting them for the sake of it. It was about sending a message. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sound of the industrial mixer downstairs hummed in her mind like a war drum. She could almost hear the echo of roller derby whistles, the slap of protective pads colliding. Her heartbeat fell into that rhythm. Friday couldn't come soon enough. By morning, she was up before dawn, kneading dough with the kind of focus that sharpened her mood like a blade. The plan was set. The bait was laid. And when those 3 stepped through the bakery door again, they'd find a Claire Mitchell they had never met before. Friday arrived with a bright, cloudless sky, the kind that made the whole town linger outside. By 4 o'clock, Claire's bakery already smelled like heaven. Racks of golden croissants, strawberry danishes glistening with glaze, and fresh baguettes cooling in neat rows. The free tasting sign was propped against the window, big block letters in cheerful yellow chalk. On the surface, everything looked warm and welcoming. But behind the counter, Claire had arranged things with military precision. The display case on the left had been shifted to narrow the walkway. The small cafe tables were moved so customers would naturally crowd toward the right, leaving a clear path between the counter and the door, an alley that could be sealed off in an instant if she stepped into it. The heavy dough roller sat beneath the counter, its polished handle barely visible. Beside it was a smaller French rolling pin lighter, but perfect for a quick swing. Every tray and utensil was exactly where she wanted it. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. By 5, customers were trickling in chatting sampling pastries. Claire kept her smile calm, but her eyes flicked toward the window every few minutes. At 5:17, they appeared Travis in his usual leather vest, flanked by the lanky, sharp-jawed Evan and the thick-set Mike. They didn't rush in. They sauntered, pushing the door open with an exaggerated slowness, scanning the room like they owned it. Travis spotted the sign-in sheet for the raffle cake and smirked. "Free cake." "Guess I'll take my chances," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard him. Evan chuckled, muttering something under his breath that made Mike snort. Claire didn't move from behind the counter. "Welcome, gentlemen," she said, her tone neutral. "Help yourselves." They took that as a green light. Travis grabbed 2 danishes without using the tongs. Evan leaned over the counter, just far enough to be in her space, eyes traveling in a way that made her skin crawl. Mike trailed behind his big hands, shoving pastries into his hoodie pocket, like they were free samples at a warehouse club. The other customers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to be deeply invested in their coffee cups. A young mother hustled her toddler toward the door. Claire's chest tightened. This was exactly why they had to be stopped. Travis reached for a cinnamon roll, and as he did, his hand brushed deliberately against Claire's arm. Soft dough. Huh? You need this yourself. His grin widened, daring her to react. She didn't flinch. Every morning, she said evenly. Then, just as Evan leaned in to make his move, Claire's hand dropped below the counter. Her fingers wrapped around the dough roller's handle, lifting it with a steady grip. The weight felt perfect, familiar, the same balance she'd used to flatten stubborn dough into submission. She stepped out from behind the counter, moving into the narrow aisle she'd cleared earlier. The 3 men instinctively shifted toward her, still smirking, still thinking they were in control. Claire stopped just short of Travis, the roller hanging casually at her side. "You boys like free samples?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying over the murmurs in the room. They laughed, but the sound faltered when she stepped in closer, her shadow cutting across Travis's chest. The room's chatter died completely. The moment had arrived. Claire's pulse slowed, her focus narrowing until it was just her, the roller, and 3 men who had no idea they'd already walked into the oven. The smirk on Travis's face lingered just a moment too long enough for Claire to read every ounce of arrogance in it. She tightened her grip on the dough roller and with a single fluid motion swung it upward in a sharp arc. The solid wood connected with the underside of the counter as she stepped forward, the crack echoing like a gunshot. Every head in the bakery turned. Travis's smirk faltered. "Hey," he started, but Claire didn't give him the courtesy of finishing. She pivoted her hips, channeling the old roller derby stance, and drove the roller sideways into his ribs. The air whooshed out of him, his body folding around the impact as he stumbled back into Evan. Evan barked a curse, his hands shooting out to grab her shoulders. Claire twisted, slipping under his grip, and brought the smaller French rolling pin up in her left hand. With a quick, precise flick of her wrist, she wrapped it hard against the back of his knuckles. He yelped, dropping the Danish he'd been clutching, and staggered away, clutching his hand like it had caught fire. Mike, slower to react, lunged toward her. Claire stepped sideways, letting his momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled, she planted one foot and brought the big dough roller down across the back of his thigh. The sound was a dull thud, followed by a grunt of pain that silenced even the nervous shuffling of the customers. "Get out," she said, her voice low, each word dropping like a brick. Travis straightened, trying to muster the same swagger he'd walked in with. "Lady, you're gonna regret." The roller came up again, and this time she didn't swing. She held it firmly in both hands, the solid wood level, with his chest, her stance grounded, her eyes locked on his. "I said, get out." For a long second, no one moved. Then Evan muttered, "Screw this," and started for the door, still shaking his sore hand. Mike limped after him. Travis lingered half a beat longer, his jaw working, but the room's silence pressed in on him like a weight. Finally, he spat a curse and followed his crew out into the street. The bell above the door jingled as it closed, leaving behind a bakery thick with the scent of sugar and the sharp edge of adrenaline. Claire stood still for a moment, the dough roller resting against her leg, her breath steady. Then the customers began to stir. An older man at the corner table gave a slow nod. The young mother who'd left earlier peeked in through the window, her expression half awe, half relief. Someone started clapping, hesitant at first, then joined by another and another. Claire didn't smile. Not yet. The roller was still warm in her hands, her pulse still thrumming in her ears. She walked back behind the counter, set the roller down, and straightened the trays Travis's crew had disturbed. It was over, but the feeling of control, of finally reclaiming her space, pulsed in her veins like fresh coffee. For the first time since opening the bakery, she felt untouchable. The moment the door shut behind them, Claire knew things in her bakery had changed forever. The air felt lighter, the tension gone, replaced by something solid: respect. People no longer avoided her gaze. They were looking straight at her, their eyes carrying something new. A teenage boy near the pastry case broke the silence. "That was awesome," he said, his voice cracking. His friend nodded so hard, his baseball cap nearly fell off. A few customers chuckled, the sound warm, supportive. Claire set the dough roller down on the counter, the wood gleaming under the lights. "Free tastings are still on," she said, her voice calm, as though nothing unusual had just happened. The crowd loosened. People resumed talking, sampling pastries, laughing again. But now, the laughter had none of the sharp, mocking edge it had earlier in the week. An older woman approached the counter, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun. "You've got guts, dear," she said, sliding a 5 into the tip jar. "Don't let anyone take this place from you." "I don't plan on it," Claire replied with a small smile. For the rest of the evening, the bakery hummed with life. The free event became less about pastries and more about people stopping by to check on her, to stand with her in quiet solidarity. Word traveled fast in town. By the time she locked up, she'd already heard that Travis and his crew had been spotted sulking at the gas station, their bravado dimmed. That night, Claire sat at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, the torn shirt folded beside her. She studied the rip in the fabric again, but this time she didn't see loss. She saw a turning point, the exact line where she'd stopped being a passive target and started being someone who refused to be pushed around. In the following days, the dynamic shifted. The 3 bullies didn't show their faces near her bakery again. Regular customers started bringing friends, telling the story with more flair each time. Some swore the dough roller had cracked the countertop. Others claimed she'd spun like a martial arts movie hero. Claire didn't bother correcting them. Let the legend grow. It served its purpose. One afternoon, a man in a crisp button-down stopped by. He introduced himself as a small business owner from across town and offered a handshake. "Heard about what you did," he said. "Good on you. People like that count on us staying quiet. You showed them the door, literally." Claire thanked him, realizing she'd earned more than a fleeting moment of satisfaction. She'd gained allies' respect and a renewed sense of pride. The dough roller went back to its spot beneath the counter, still oiled and ready. Not because she expected trouble again, but because it reminded her that strength didn't come from what you baked. It came from knowing you could stand your ground when the heat turned up. And in her bakery, she was always in control of the oven. Life has a way of testing boundaries, and people will push as far as you allow them. Claire's story is proof that standing your ground doesn't always require shouting or reckless anger. Sometimes it's about calculated action, the quiet resolve to reclaim what's yours, and the courage to confront those who cross the line. Bullies thrive in silence, feeding on the fear they create. But when you meet them with calm, unwavering strength, you strip away their power. Respect, once earned, is hard to take back, and in any kitchen or corner of life, that's a recipe worth keeping.